Hello and welcome to Tea with the FT Advisor. I'm Simone Kyriakou, editor of the FT Advisor.
And I'm Vanessa Barnes, chair of the Women's Wealth Alliance. I sit on the board of the Consumer Duty Alliance and founder of Hannay Wealth LLP.
Fantastic. And joining us today on this episode is Claire Blackwell. She's the co-founder of The Next Stage and a consumer advocate.
Welcome.
Thank you for joining us.
Delighted to be here.
Well, we're talking about marketing today, sort of marketing to women and marketing to women who want to come into financial services. So let's start by maybe thinking about perhaps where financial services, financial advice has got it maybe a little bit wrong when it comes to actually getting more women through the doors of an advice firm's offices.
So I think what we should potentially start off by saying is this isn't a nice to have or a diversity issue. This is actually a commercial reality. If nearly 2/3 of the UK wealth is now sitting with women, then why are we still being marketed to as if it's a niche segment?
For the wealthy only.
For the wealthy only, but not only, but more for men, is essentially how traditionally we have done that. And I think it goes a long way back to financial services marketing in general, which is that it was largely male-led and targeted at men. In a way, it's a laziness, I suppose. The industry has created product that is easy for it to create, marketed it, it's fairly cheap to market in this area. And then if it hasn't worked, then moved on to the next piece of product. And so there hasn't actually been an enormous need to try and attract women from a marketing perspective.
And that could be anything, couldn't it? Because I know as a journalist, when we sort of type in professional services or financial services to kind of find some nice pictures, quite often it's professional men with nice watches or very professional women wearing suits in a very corporate, almost sterile environment. I don't know if you find this when you're trying to market your services.
Definitely. It's very stiff and it doesn't look very friendly. So I think actually it can be quite formidable for some people, especially if they haven't had an experience. It's interesting because people who've perhaps had parents who've had financial advisors, so women in particular, I think approach it very differently than those that have never had any contact with financial advice. I think it can be quite a formidable barrier to entry.
So I think that what happened there is it feels quite hard, it feels quite masculine, it feels for the wealthy. And so when the industry woke up and started saying, well, how do we attract women? There was the pink it and shrink it kind of approach. So let's just soften some of the wording. Let's put a different font on the front. Let's put a few pictures of women on it, as opposed to, and hope that women will buy it. But actually what you have to look at is how consumers buy product, okay? And when it comes to advice and money, men tend to buy more on a factual, analytical, and triggered perspective. So if you think about it, it's bonus time, it's ISA season time, I've just had an increase, I'm at work, I'm engaged, this is the expectation I have. And that trigger, an advert or something like that, will force them to say, okay, yes, I need to invest at this point. Whereas women tend to buy more on a holistic sense. They tend to buy in quieter moments, so when their mental load isn't as much. So if you look at things like over the summer holidays, they tend to buy on social trust as opposed to on an institutional trust. So they tend to buy on the recommendation of a friend or after a discussion with a family member. And so again, you'll see that women will buy over a Christmas period or over a holiday period, and they tend to buy based on outcomes. So this is the outcome or the situation I need to care for, as opposed to this is the trigger that I need to invest for. And so you'll find that if you look at sort of ISA campaigns of old, they would be in February and March, because that's the trigger, that's when more men, your allowance runs out, and you need to create that billboard that says, do this now. Whereas actually, if you want to engage women, you need to be talking to them in a manner that they want to feel heard and engaged, but over the quieter periods, so over the summer months, over the Christmas holidays, over the Easter weekend and stuff. And traditionally, we just haven't done that.
But that's typically when women are at home with their relatives, with their sister. They might think, well, I've got to sort out my mother's probate, or I've got to sort out my mother's will. I'll wait till my family come round. I'm seeing them in a couple of weekends' time. So it's that kind of societal impact that you're looking
at.
That
holistic buying, yes, that you will find that, you're sitting over the Christmas table and you'll notice that it's probably this year that we might have to do something about long-term care for mum or something.
And are you finding that with women?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's really important is with the nuance is that with women, it's what the money can do. So there's a problem to be solved, or an awareness that you might have a problem in the future. So what can I do? What can I do with this money? If you've inherited, for example, and often women at the moment are double inheriting. So you're looking at a situation and how am I going to protect myself, protect my children, or protect my other wider family down the line. But there is a function. And so when you speak about money to them, you need to relate the function to the money. Whereas I think, and I know you shouldn't categorise everybody, but I think it's more results driven when you're talking to men rather than actually achieving the objective. So it's just changing your language. And I think also making sure for both sides of the equation, we're far too jargon driven in personal finance. We've got to get rid of all of the capital letters so that people can actually talk in English. And I think if you can then do that, people relax a little bit more. They're not going to be bamboozled, and they're not going to feel like they're asking a stupid question.
I think you've made such a valid point there, and that is, there's often this misconception in the industry that women can't tolerate risk. Okay, and I just want to blast that out the water because we can tolerate risk. I reckon all three of us probably take a lot of risk, but the risk of not being able to meet that outcome, the risk of not being able to educate your child, or the risk of not being able to put a roof over someone's head, or not being able to care for your mother or father in their later life, that is a risk that I think sometimes women are not prepared to take. And so that's why sometimes more conservative portfolios are chosen over shorter periods of time, because it's a different risk to a financial risk.
It's a different risk to a market risk.
It's an objective risk.
It's an objective risk. It's an emotional risk. It's a caring risk that says, I can't take that risk, therefore I can't have that option.
So without marketing it as risk mitigation, which is horrendous jargon, how do you go about sort of marketing that to your clients?
I think you need to start talking about what people really... Most people have a very simple question. So you just have to sort of talk through and find out what is the question they're asking. And often it's something like, have I got enough money? Will I end up on cat food in retirement? It's that kind of
thing. Cat food is expensive, Vanessa.
But it's that kind of question. And so when you find out what that question is, then you work backward from that fear. And I think and I don't think that makes any difference between men or women. I think you get, often I think sometimes people who are really capable, really driven, who've built fantastic businesses and provided solutions for other people, they're often the people that are most worried about that question because they've ignored everything else, because they have been driven into what their purpose is in life. And then suddenly one day they think, oh my goodness, am I in the right place and am I where I should be? And actually, once you identify the fear that they have, then you can start, well, let's look at it. Let's start analysing what you need. So going back to basics on things like budget, what are your expenses? What do you hope to do? I don't necessarily want to know exactly where you want to go on holiday, but would you like to go on holiday regularly? Do you want to have an expensive garden that you spend lots of money on? What is it that actually motivates you? And then you start looking at what that's going to cost. And then you start looking at, well, what do you need to have in order to fund that budget? So it's going back to basics, I think, is always the way to start.
That's assuming they've come through your doors in the first place.
Yes.
And I think that is a big issue, because I think, again, if we go back to that stigma of what a financial advisor, or what wealth management, which is what it was called, people think it's managing stuff that wealthy people have. They don't realise that getting advice really should be for the many. Yes. And that an advisor can help you plan through those fears and can deal with really quite simple, can help you unpick the messiness of life, help you understand the decisions you need to make, as opposed to it being somebody who invests for the wealthy.
I think some of this will become pension driven, because as more and more people end up with a catalogue of pensions as
Yes.
opposed to one final salary scheme as it would have been maybe 30 or 40 years ago. They are going to need navigation through that. And I think that brings into question the fact that that it's nearly 40% the gender pension gap in this country, which is an
crazy.
absolute disgrace. Yeah. And only 60% of divorce cases take pensions into consideration, even today. That's what's happening. Mainly because I think often a woman will trade a house for a pension.
Yes,
and that goes back to
It
goes back to that issue of the caring.
Yeah.
So you will leave the pension on the table, provided you get the house that doesn't destabilise the children's outcome.
Yeah, I think it's the difference between price and value.
Yes.
I think the fact that the
Interesting.
pension might be a bigger asset, it's more valuable to that woman to have the house. But I think, again, we need more of an educational programme to say, well, actually, when they've grown up and they have left, what are you going to do?
Because, of course, the Women's Wealth Alliance is not there to say men cannot do any advice to women, but it's there recognising that according to FCA data, we've got, 19% of all advisors are women. And if there is this growing cohort of 60% of the UK's wealth being in the hands of women, we've got a huge opportunity set, right, isn't it? This isn't a sort of a stick to beat the existing advice companies with. It's saying this is an opportunity set.
Absolutely, and it's also about raising the skills of male advisors, because I've had a conversation with somebody recently who said that he works a lot with GPs. Now, 51% of GPs are women, but he finds it very difficult to engage. So again, we said, well, and he wants to, for obvious reasons. I mean, it's a business resilience issue. If 60% of wealth is in the hands of women, then you need to be able to talk their language to market to them, and then also to advise them. So it's about trying to look at information that you can make your website more female friendly.
Without being pink washing.
Yeah, exactly. But it's about actually addressing the issues that they care about. It's the same in any kind of marketing situation.
Well, that is the thing. And I think this is where FS has gone wrong, not only the advice industry, but the financial services industry as a whole. And it goes back to that point I made at the beginning around, I think that financial services marketing has historically been quite lazy. Okay? It's fairly easy to manufacture the product and you sell it where you can. And if you can't sell it, you move on to the next product. Whereas if you look at something like the FMCG sector or people who manufacture consumer goods, and you look at how hard they have to work to nuance their product and their marketing to the niche or the market they want to sell it. We don't do that.
They get brand ambassadors, though, don't they?
They get brand ambassadors, but they get research, they get data. They're moving every single day based on insights that they are gathering to tweak their products, to tweak their marketing strategies, to tweak how they talk, to tweak the narrative. And we, in the FS sector, I haven't seen anybody who is doing that really, really well, let alone in the wealth sector.
But advisors have the data. You've got sitting on tons of data, aren't you?
Yeah, but it's individual. 70% of advisors in individual small firms with less than 5 people.
So there isn't enough, yes.
Yeah, there isn't enough collective accumulated knowledge, I think.
At an individual advisor business, there is not enough data to get a picture of the whole of the UK consumer profile and understand their buying and selling patterns. So that is something that you only get through things like Experian, or the very large houses have that data. But I can tell you that they're not using it in that way.
But you could look at your firm's data, couldn't you, and say, okay, well, actually, I've got 31% female clients, and then look at your community and say, well, actually, in the area, the locality I live in, maybe there's 58% women compared to 42% men. I was just making sure my maths was there, was correct there. So perhaps then that's also just looking on a very microcosmic level. What can you do more in your community? Are you going to the right places to market, or are you just still going to the golf club or to relying on word of mouth, which isn't always the best way, is it?
No, we've been talking to some advisors who do that very successfully, and it is local community is the key, and they will join various clubs and other things in order to widen their circle of contact, and actually they've been very successful at it. So we're trying to bring them in to talk about what they do so that other people can use that model and look at doing something like that. I think it's more difficult in the cities because I think local community is often you're a commute away. So
yes,
I think,
of course, yeah.
I think it's more difficult from that point of view. But also I think it's about addressing, you talked about product manufacturing, and also products and even tax and tax relief are manufactured for the male career. That assumes you start at one age, you finish at another, and it's a very incremental stage throughout your career. Why is it that if you inherit some money from your parents and you have taken 2 or 3 years, maybe you've gone part-time while you were looking after your elderly parents and your teen or your uni children, whatever it might be, and then you look back and think, well, actually, I've underfunded my pension for 3 years because my salary's dropped. Why can you not take your inheritance and say, right, I'm going to invest that back in my pension? The government won't allow you to do it, HMRC won't allow you to do it because they think tax relief should be on an incremental basis. So the whole model is not right for women.
I agree that the products, the services, the wrappers, that is definitely not something that we as society have dealt with. I think one of the problems that advisors have in marketing strategy is, first of all, time, okay? I've never met an advisor who is time rich, okay? So to take all that data and to understand it and assimilate it and match your current book of business to your future book of business, it's actually very time consuming, and it's actually a science as well. So I do think that it's something that potentially people, to ask an individual advisor to do is very difficult, particularly when, if you're doing your job well, you are probably getting 75% of your new business off referrals. And from referrals, you'll be attracting the same type of clients that you probably already have. And there is an advice shortage in this country. So we have more people than we have advisors. And so if your day is already booked with people who are already coming in your door, then it's quite difficult to say, well, I want to change the shape of my servicing, or I want to change the shape of my business, and therefore I'm going to take the following steps. It's just the majority of advisors aren't doing that.
You made an interesting point when we were sort of doing the preamble to the podcast. You said that sometimes when women come to see you, they tend to be a little bit more prickly or cautious or reserved. So maybe that's something that advisors should realise, that sometimes a woman might actually come across as a little bit cold or disengaged from the start. So how do you sort of work around that to bring them in, to make them feel like they're included?
I think you need to start unpicking what the question is they've come in with, because people don't always lead with that. I feel I need some advice, or I've inherited. That's not actually what they're worried about. Sometimes it is, because some people see inheritance as a burden, because they see it as a duty and a responsibility, and they're worried about that. And that's happening more and more and more as boomers, as we've already said, boomers are dying off.
Sorry.
It sounds like multitudes, but they are inheriting and they do feel responsible. But actually, behind it, there's another question, and that is: will I be able to go part-time from the age of X, whatever that might be, or how can I help my children on the property ladder, because it's not going to be as easy for them as it was for us. And that's when you get to, so when you chat and you get to that question, then you start building up from that. And I think it's finding what the fear is, what the driver is of the visit that you've got.
And are those conversations slightly then different? Do you tailor your language in a different way, or how do you go about trying to make that person feel really comfortable sitting down for the advice?
Well, I think definitely female clients will give as much weight to their non-financial objectives as their financial ones. Okay. So we actually have to widen the conversation into what they're trying to achieve. And then you can draw it back to how the finances will help achieve that objective. And that is something that we talk about all the time with a male audience, that they've got to understand and take on board if they don't want to lose 2/3 of their generation after they've been bereaved, because the women will generally live longer. So I think that's a very important thing to do. And I think also it's important to talk about things like, for example, if they're on their own, how are they going to care for themselves later in life? And to start asking those kind of questions, because once you do that, you engage. And then they actually realise that the money will help them achieve, whether it's protecting themselves, whether it's protecting the children, through time. Then you start to build the story, and that's what you do, and that's when people engage.
And there are points of empathy as well, whether it's sort of being a parent. So you don't have to be a female advisor to empathise with a woman who's come to you. No. But if you've got children or grandchildren, immediately you've got a point of empathy, and you can just build on that shared experience, right?
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Perhaps we don't always talk about that.
Yeah, and also there are other things that lots of men want to do things that better. So they will say, I mean, I had a conversation with somebody recently who was saying, I wish I'd known the effect it would have on a pension, because when my wife was on maternity leave, we would have done something about, bridging the gap if we had thought about it. So actually, a medical advisor can bring that up, and that's entirely comfortable conversation. If you're talking to perhaps a younger generation or even the generation beyond them, bringing that into the conversation. And I had a conversation with a female client the other day. She said that they both work in the business. The husband has proportionately more income than her, therefore is a high rate taxpayer. And she said to me, do you think we should pay most of the pension contribution to him? And my response was, well, technically, that's correct. Yes. But the reality is, why impoverish yourself for tax relief? Yeah. And she said, I'm really glad you said that, because she'd been clearly uncomfortable with it. And I said, look, you've got to look at the exit strategy as well, because if you haven't built up any substantial pension, when you start to draw it down, you won't be using up your own personal allowance. So I said, there is actually some maths at the other end. But I said, the principle of you saying, oh no, well, he's the higher rate taxpayer, he should get also all the pension contributions, I don't think it sits right.
No, I don't think it's fair.
No, I don't think it's fair. And it's not always about who gets the most tax relief. It's about
confident futures. It's about, feeling that, yes, I can make decisions, I am empowered, and I can have choices in my life.
Yeah. And then also it's then talking about risk, isn't it? Because if you're not involved in the pension, why are you going to worry about risk and reward if you're not invested in it? So I think, and the other thing that happens with women is once they get through what they perceive to be a knowledge barrier about investing, once they commit to the market, they stay in it when things get choppy. So they actually get better results, but it's getting them to that in the first place, which I think is the problem.
And moving on a little bit from that, let's look again at that statistic we mentioned earlier about sort of 19% of the advice market at the moment is female. How do we get more women into financial services? Because again, the same rules of pinkwashing don't apply. I would not be attracted to a job that just, slaps a woman in a pink suit on with a thumbs up. It's not really something that would actually appeal to me. But how do we market ourselves as professional financial services firms to encourage more female interns, to encourage more women to actually consider it as a financial career?
So I think this is where we move from marketing into brand. Right. Okay, this is the difference. And brand is culture and strategy. And there's a wonderful saying that you can't fool all of the people all the time. And your brand, your culture, your strategy will out. And unless you have that right, you will just not attract and maintain women over the long term. So I think that's where you've got to be, and this is like to the very core of your organization. You have to want this to happen. And wanting something to happen and making it happen requires a certain amount of compromise. And unless you are prepared to do that, we will just never get this right. I mean, I've got a good example. I heard of somebody the other day who wanted somebody quite successful on their board as a female and said, well, we'd really like her to join, but do you think she's going to want things to change because we don't want to change? Well, what's the point?
But it depends what they mean by change. If they think that she's suddenly going to come in and start throwing little cushions all over the place, then clearly, no, nobody really wants that. Well, I know some people might want that. But if it means, maybe starting to change some of the language, or as you pointed out earlier, change some of that jargon, remove some of the very hard, sort of very diamond encrusted edges off of this and make it a little bit smoother, a little bit more appealing, then it's a different matter, isn't it?
You definitely have to change the language. I went to a presentation once at the Treasury, and that was about increasing. So for 10 years, the Women in Finance Charter has been running, and 1% a year increase has happened. And obviously that's not enough. I mean, they've worked really hard for that, but obviously at the senior levels that hasn't happened. And they had somebody in from a recruitment agency talk about this one day, and they said, sometimes it's even about how you advertise a position. And the example they gave was the use of the word expert. So they decided to do a survey of female and male applicants and ask them how long they thought it would take to become an expert in an area. And on average, with the women, it was 10 years. And on average, with the men, it was 3 weeks.
Wow.
So when
That's confidence.
Yes. So when the word expert, it wasn't average. So imagine what the lower end was.
My word.
3 hours. But if the word expert was in there, women would have self-filtered out of that if they'd had less than 10 years experience on average. And I think, well, you know, so you don't use words like that, and you change how you advertise it. And also, I think part of it is the perception of the whole profession, that it was transactional. There have been scandals, there has been a bad rep, and it's about actually showing how much we've evolved and how much financial services in general has evolved, and making it look like women are in there and successful, and encouraging that, because then it becomes something people look at and think, oh, what's that? Because 93% of women financial planners would recommend the role to other women.
We found that from the Women's Wealth Alliance survey.
Yeah.
I think that's one thing I will say. Financial advice is not a finance job. It is an advice job. It is a people job, and it's a relationship job. Yes, very much. And I think people sometimes actually are put off by it because they think, oh, I'm not really good with numbers, and it's not about that. It's not about that, because when your client phones you in the middle of the night and says, can you come over for a cup of tea like this because I've got an issue that we need to talk to you about, that is when your advisor is worth their weight in gold, because they come over and they listen.
But that's a really positive note on which to end on, actually. Thank you very much, Claire, for
Thank you,
recording this. And thank you very much, Vanessa, as well.
My pleasure.
And thank you for watching. For more on the Women's Wealth Alliance, or for more on women's wealth in general, visit ftadvisor.com.